Picture this. You're pulled over by the police. They accuse you of a crime you didn't commit. You try to protest, but they don't listen. They arrest you, drag you away in front of a crowd of witnesses, all the while, their arrogance growing. You're powerless, or so you think. But what if I told you the person who would decide your fate, who would make the final judgment on these officers, was none other than you? This woman wasn't just some victim of racial injustice. She was the judge, the very judge presiding over the case against the officers who wronged her. What would you do if your entire future was in the hands of the person who once tried to break you? Detective Mark Carter and Officer Lena Foster had a reputation. For years, they had targeted black citizens during routine stops, their actions steeped in racial bias. Their history of harassment went unnoticed, unpunished, and swept under the rug, time and time again. Their badges gave them a shield, one that allowed them to act above the law, with impunity. For Carter and Foster, they were above reproach. But then came Jasmine Carter, young, poised, and unafraid. Jasmine was a woman who had seen it all. Raised in a community where systemic racism was as entrenched as the streets she walked, Jasmine knew how it felt to be judged by the color of her skin. But she wasn't just another face in the crowd. She was determined to change things. Even as she stood there, wrongfully accused during a routine traffic stop, she kept her composure. In that moment, Jasmine would show them what it meant to remain calm in the face of adversity. Then it happened. Without warning, Carter and Foster escalated the situation. What began as a simple stop quickly turned into a storm of lies. They accused Jasmine of resisting arrest, an outright fabrication. Their voices grew louder, their hands more forceful. It wasn't just a routine stop anymore. It was a full-blown assault on her dignity. Jasmine felt the heat of the situation, the sting of their false accusations. With every word they threw at her, they were erasing her humanity. But Jasmine remained calm. She knew the system. She had seen it fail countless times. She knew that her silence, her restraint, might be the only thing that could save her. But Jasmine's story didn't start in that car. No, it began long before that moment, a childhood spent in a community where her worth was questioned by the color of her skin, a childhood where she'd watch her elders speak of justice, but see very little of it. She was taught early on that the law was not designed for people like her. Yet despite the odds, she harbored a dream of becoming a judge, a dream of sitting in that very courtroom one day and showing the world that the system could change. It wasn't just a dream, it was her fight. And in that moment, it seemed like that fight would be crushed by the very officers who stood before her. Jasmine was brought to the court, only to receive the shock of her life. There, in the center of the courtroom, was the seat that would define everything she had fought for. The case she was about to preside over was her own. She wasn't just another defendant, she was the judge. She had been handed the very power that she had longed for, the power to make them pay for what they had done. For a moment, time seemed to stand still. This was more than a courtroom. It was her battleground, the moment she had waited for, the moment where she could right the wrongs she had lived through. She wasn't just a victim anymore. She was the force that could hold them accountable. As she took her seat, the weight of the gavel seemed heavier than ever. Jasmine knew the stakes. The officers before her weren't just any criminals. They were part of a system that had systematically oppressed people like her. The tension in the courtroom was palpable as everyone waited for her to speak. But Jasmine's mind raced. Could she remain impartial? Could she truly hold these officers accountable, knowing the personal pain they had caused her? The whispers around her grew louder, questioning her ability to remain objective. Could she become the very thing she had once despised, the enforcer of a broken system? With every gavel strike, her internal conflict grew. Was she going to follow the law, or was she going to break the cycle of injustice? Every moment felt like an eternity. Jasmine's sighs were heavy, her eyes scanning the room, filled with uncertainty. And yet, she knew this was her moment. a moment to change the system, a moment to take control of her own fate. As Jasmine prepared for the trial, she received an unexpected visitor, a mentor, someone who had seen it all. Senior Judge Eleanor Stone, a woman who had navigated the treacherous waters of the justice system for decades, pulled Jasmine aside. With a stern look in her eyes, Eleanor warned her, "You may think you have control, Jasmine, but this case isn't just about righting a wrong. It's about survival. You can't let your emotions lead you. The world's watching. One wrong move, and you could lose everything." Jasmine had heard the warnings, but nothing could prepare her for what lay ahead. The officers, Carter and Foster, had their own secrets. Secrets that could not only ruin their careers, but could expose the corrupt system they had been a part of. As Jasmine dug deeper, she uncovered hidden files and documents that revealed disturbing patterns of behavior, discriminatory practices, false arrests, and a history of abuse. These officers weren't just a threat to her, they were a threat to everything she believed in. But what would she do with this newfound knowledge? The day of the trial arrived, and the atmosphere in the courtroom was tense. Everyone's eyes were on Jasmine as she entered the room, taking her seat at the bench. The officers, Carter and Foster, sat before her, their arrogance palpable. They had no idea what was about to happen. The trial began, and the officers stood firm in their defense, throwing out words like routine procedure, standard protocol, and necessary force. But Jasmine wasn't fooled. She could see right through their polished lies, their rehearsed words. They tried to paint themselves as the heroes, the ones who did what was necessary to maintain order. But their smugness only added fuel to the fire burning inside her. Jasmine's integrity was tested with every word they spoke. She had to balance the weight of her own emotions and the need to remain impartial. But the evidence, she couldn't ignore it. The documents she had uncovered were too important to let slide. As she sifted through the case, every moment brought her closer to the truth. The tension in the courtroom reached a boiling point when Jasmine, after a long pause, spoke. Her voice steady, but filled with the power of truth. "Detective Carter, Officer Foster," she began, "you both claim you acted within the law. But what happens when the law is used to perpetuate injustice? What happens when the very system that's supposed to protect us is the one that breaks us?" The officers shifted uncomfortably in their seats. The audience was on edge, waiting for what would come next. Jasmine wasn't finished. "I've seen the files. I've seen the pattern. I know what you've done, and I will not let it slide." The words hung in the air, each one striking harder than the last. She brought up their past misconduct, detailing the arrests, the false reports, the cases of racial profiling, each accusation landing like a punch to the gut. The officers had never expected someone like her to challenge them, to hold them accountable. The room fell silent. Jasmine could feel the weight of the moment. The courtroom audience was holding its breath, waiting for her next move. She had the power to expose everything, to destroy these officers' careers and open up a broader conversation about the systemic issues within law enforcement. But what would that mean for her? She had to be careful. Too much pressure, and she could lose her position. Too little, and the fight for justice would be forgotten. Her internal conflict intensified. Was she willing to risk it all? Would she uphold the law, or would she take matters into her own hands, letting the truth come crashing down? The line between justice and revenge was thin, and Jasmine knew she had to choose. Each time the gavel slammed, her heart raced faster. The tension was unbearable. Would she remain neutral, or would she allow her personal history to dictate the outcome of this trial? As Jasmine faces the hardest decision of her life, the world watches in silence. But what do you think? Will these officers finally face the consequences of their actions, or will the system fail Jasmine once again? Can the law truly bring justice when it's designed to protect those who abuse their power? And what about you? Have you ever been in a position where you had the power to change something that could affect others, maybe even change your own life forever. How did you handle it? Did you stand up for what was right, or did you let the pressure stop you? Drop your thoughts below. Let's talk about justice, power, and the personal struggles we face when we're given the chance to make a difference. The story you've just heard is more than just a courtroom drama. It's a reflection of the broken systems we face, the inequalities that persist, and the personal battles that often go unseen. Jasmine's journey is a reminder that the fight for justice is never easy, and those in power rarely want to give up their control. Jasmine's decision was not just about one trial. It was about everything that came before it, and everything that would come after. The weight of her choice carried the emotional scars of a lifetime spent in the shadow of a system that failed her and countless others. Throughout this story, we've seen her struggle, her strength, and her ultimate confrontation with the truth. But her story isn't over. The road ahead will not be simple, and as we look at the larger picture, what changes do we need to see in the system? What will it take for real justice to prevail?